nice to see you, Will. Thank you for joining today, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation together. Obviously, we're going to talk about the status of life on planet Earth, and there's a lot of issues relating to us as a species and where we're at on our journey. And yes, I'm very much looking forward to to sort of fleshing that out a little bit and see where we go, and hopefully come up with some, I don't know, more clarity, I think, for listeners in terms of how they can see the world, because I feel like one of the problems is a lack of understanding of what's going on the planet, and so people are kind of fighting against things without really knowing exactly what's going on. So from your side, just to give me a general sense, Will, where do you feel you're going to head your efforts and what you're doing? Obviously, you've done a lot of work. I'm very well aware, as a lot of people are, what you've done till this point in time. Where are you heading? Like, where are you at the moment? Like, where's this journey taken you? Like, the man sitting here in front of me today, like, give me some sense of where that's at and where you see yourself heading.
Right. Thank you, David. And yeah, I think, essentially where I see myself moving is along the trajectory of bringing spirituality and veganism to more people, and to help our society understand the deeper structure of the problems that we're facing. Because I think most people have no idea that we're living in a culture that's organized at its core around herding animals, around owning animals as property for food. And we do it on such a massive scale. And I think we think of it as kind of a friendly behavior, that hot dogs, hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and fish sticks and eggs are our friends. They give us protein and calcium. So we have this relationship with animal agriculture that it's our friend, and ranchers and fishermen, that's kind of a noble, natural calling, and to have animals and to use them and to kill them and eat them is part of who we are.
Yeah.
And so I think essentially, from my point of view, there's nothing more important than helping to question that on every level. So whether that's the environmental impacts of animal agriculture, or the health impacts, or the spiritual, psychological impacts, or the cultural impacts, or the health impacts, there's so many different impacts. But I think we're just scratching the surface of this understanding, and we're just scratching the surface of having any conversation about it in our society. It's pretty much ignored in the mass media, and even ignored in the alternative media for the most part. And people don't want to hear about it for the most part, because people are naturally uncomfortable talking about something that is so intimate as food. So basically, David, I'm traveling a lot. My wife, Madeline, and I, I'm writing. I'm just working right now on finishing up a book on Buddhism and veganism, because I think the spiritual traditions of the planet should help out with this whole thing, although very often they don't. And I think it's about just questioning as deeply as we can who we are and what our purpose is on this earth, essentially.
Yes.
As individuals.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is it when you say we're sort of scratching at the surface? What do you feel that surface is that we're scratching on? Is it the understanding of our behavior, or because ultimately, if we look at, the way we treat animals or the environment or each other, whatever the case may be, it always comes back to us. And I feel like that's the key ingredient we seem to take out of the package. And whereas to me, I feel like, is the scratching at the surface you're talking about in terms of understanding us within our own existence as a species on this planet, or where are you thinking when you say that?
Yeah, when I'm saying that we're just scratching the surface of this understanding of ourselves as I see it, it's like we're wounded from birth by being born into a culture and into institutions like our family, our religion, our education, our government, our economy, our medicine. Everything is organized around violence. Around eating animals, and then what comes, as I talk about in the World Peace Diet, when we do animal agriculture, it's based on exploiting other beings and reducing them to objects. And so we're wounded not just by the foods, which are pretty toxic to us actually, but by the attitudes that we're eating along with the food. And so we're just scratching the surface of actually seeing this, because there's this massive denial, essentially, because like Carl Jung said, he said the shadow archetype is what we are, but what we don't think we are, but other people are. They're like that, and so the bigger the shadow is, the harder it is to see. And this is, I think, is the big one in our society. So we're just now scratching the surface of being able to recognize the outlines of this massive, devastating shadow. It's kind of like, maybe the people in Troy, when this horse came in, and they thought, "Oh, this is great. This is our friend. We're gonna," they didn't realize that this is their enemy is going to destroy them. And we're still thinking that animal agriculture is our friend. We don't realize that it will destroy us, because not only is the practice of animal agriculture destroying our physical and psychological and cultural health, but it undermines our ethical foundation. We just naturally allow exploitation and oppression and elitism and privilege and injustice because we're eating it every day. We're causing it. It's normalized so much. Yeah. So we still don't talk about that. We have, I see this all everywhere in the alternative media, and it's definitely in the mass media, that there's a little bit of awareness of veganism, but the basic thing is we have the problem with Russia, we have the problem with social injustice of various kinds, we have the problem with war in the Middle East, we have the problem with environmental devastation, but nobody links any of this to what we can do as individuals to be part of the solution, really, instead of just being part of the problem.
Yeah.
So that's it. I think what we're doing is having a conversation, which is kind of using what's available to us to create our own news, to create our own media. Because the media right now is controlled so much, I think, by forces that really would rather not have any of us talking about this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, do you see it like, obviously we can, let's say we could talk about the reality of what's going on the planet. We could talk about the status of the environment, the status of psychologically how we're doing in terms of anxiety, depression, and the psychological problems are obviously increasing as everything else is getting worse. And there's two ways I feel like we could approach it. The current way is to keep looking at the problems as they emerge and trying to find solutions to them. But to me, it still always gets back to us. I feel personally that if, let's say globally, that we all agree that we're at that point where we can't keep doing what we're doing. So in the recognition of that, we would have to then change our behavior somehow. So rather than changing it through enforcement, where we basically retrain ourselves, I feel like that there's the potential that this is what's happening on the planet, that this could be the beginning of real change, not just change in terms of new laws and new rules and new ideas of how we should behave, but genuinely a new expression of life coming from within human beings. But I feel we would have to collectively agree to that and start, obviously change everything, change the way we educate our children, change, the whole process of communication would have to change. What's important to talk about would have to change. The emphasis would dramatically go away from, business and sport and all those things that we are very competitive, and create sort of a global conscious shift where we would now be injecting more truth. Even if we don't like what we're seeing, I feel like initially we have to face the ugly truth before we can create this more beautiful world. And I feel like that tends to be avoided a little bit. We want to jump ahead of ourselves, and sometimes even I feel like the vegan festivals, they're a good thing, but they're often too much about entertainment and making people happy. And I feel like we're celebrating too soon. I feel like, and it's not that I'm saying to anyone that we can't enjoy ourselves, because you've got to be content and happy to be able to create real change in the world. You can't do it miserable. But I feel that we need to just, if we could really address the us part and find that spiritual clarity within ourselves, then I don't think we'd have to work out what to do. I think we just know what to do. And so this is where I see the dilemma, that if we keep trying to create new solutions and problems, that this could go on for a long period of time. How do you feel about that in terms of your efforts? And do you feel like sort of trying to create change by saying to people when you need new techniques and approaches in terms of outwardly is a waste of time? Or do you think that, where do you sit in that conversation?
I've been a vegan for 38 years, so I've been practicing what veganism is, which is, not buying as best as I can foods from animals and products and testing and all that. So it's, that thing I've been doing for 38 years, and I've been meditating for probably 45 years. And I think the I think the most important thing, quite honestly, I think is inner work, for individuals to do inner work. I think if we don't do the inner work, then our outer work ends up being pretty impotent. We may make all kinds of drama. We may throw blood on people. We may do all who knows, or whatever, or maybe have veg fests that are really great, or whatever it is. We can do a lot. I think there was definitely a place for that. We need to do actions in the world, for sure.
Yeah.
But when our movement is based mainly, the big problem I see is we live in a capitalist sort of marketing society, and so what we see is, okay, we've got this great idea. We need to stop eating animals. We need to go vegan. We need to market this. We need to find ways to manipulate our message to reach other people where they're at. So instead of anybody worrying about themselves becoming more conscious and more aware and more embodying a life that really reflects kindness, compassion, and sensitivity, and caring, and respect, and abundance, and all these things, instead of that, we ignore all that. We ignore this, and we just think, how can I get them to change and make a little money on it while I'm doing it? Because we have to make money, right? So our whole movement becomes sort of co-opted by large organizations that pay for studies that try to prove to us that this is the most effective way to change people towards becoming vegan, say, and that's an important thing. Well, I agree that getting our culture to move toward veganism is really important, but I think we shouldn't just try to do it without putting the main emphasis on ourselves, because otherwise our movement becomes a marketing and it becomes competitive. We have these different groups competing with each other and criticizing and blaming and shaming, and then blaming and shaming people who aren't vegan. And instead of being a movement of healing, I think it's really about healing. And the only people we can really heal are ourselves, right? We have to work on our own healing. So I'd like to see more emphasis really on personal work, on like whatever that is. I think meditation is really helpful, introspection, self-inquiry to because we're only here for a few years on this planet. And for me, I'm very aware. I'm 65, now all of a sudden. And where did all those the last 50 years go? I remember when I was in college, like it was yesterday practically. So I'm very aware that our time on this earth is very brief. We come here. And so I think that's empowering to realize that, the earth was already in a kind of a big mess. It was already, animal agriculture, war, domination of women, environmental devastation, all this injustice, everything. So we land here, we're thrown into the middle of it, we're wounded by it, we become like that system, we become competitive and critical and judgmental and self-centered and all that, because that's what we have to do. And then to me, it's like, what your question is so great is because, it's about us. So the way forward, I think, is for each one of us to heal that, and veganism is just part of that. And going vegan doesn't mean we're done. It means we're just actually kind of in the beginning stage of this transformation that we need to do. And then I think that doorway that's beckoning to us, I think there is a positive doorway. I think, the good news is that the earth is abundant. We can definitely feed everybody. There's nothing objectively stopping us from being happy, peaceful, harmonious on this earth as human beings in harmony with all the other life forms here. There's really nothing objectively stopping us. It's just our attitudes and actions and our programming. The programming is the problem. So we have to work with that ourselves. And then from that place, I think then we have a foundation to help others like in a healing way, rather than trying to market as something to change them, where the end begins to justify the means.
Yeah. Well, I think when you said programming, of course, because we're like a program that's continually being programmed,
right?
And I think that's where it gets caught up. And I think in the vegan movement, one of the things I've seen, which is it's understandable, and I can't expect others to realize this is happening unless someone helps them, because this applies to all of life, not just veganism. But veganism is obviously a very important movement. To me, it's probably the most important movement that's ever happened on the planet, only because I feel like it looks at everything. because it's asking the whole world to be peaceful, which takes care of child abuse and, whatever
Right.
whatever kind of violence and abuse. It potentially could rid the planet of violence if we could really wake up to it.
Right.
But but I'm also aware that a lot of people that are, say, become vegans are often maybe the ones that were born, program wise, more on the sensitive side and more likely to respond in a negative way to violence when it goes through their program. Their mind says, no, I don't like that. But it also means prior to becoming a vegan, they've probably been sensitive their whole life and accumulated a lot of psychological pain anyway, which is what's happening on the planet. Fear grows exponentially, and pain therefore is increasing, and that's why we're trying to find more techniques like medication to deal with that pain. But then they take that pain into veganism, and then suddenly they have a cause, they have a place to channel that pain, but they don't realize. But that's where it gets unhealthy, and that's where all causes can potentially become unhealthy. Whereas I think what we need to do is, we need to recognize, of course, like you said, we need those people in the street because they're shaking the world up and they're making people aware. But then we need to pull back. And this is where I think we need these kind of adult conversations taking place, where we need to encourage and recognize whether you're vegan or not is irrelevant to some degree. And that is that we as a species are accumulating more and more psychological pain and confusion the longer we go down our existing pathway, even though it's the pathway that got us here, which is interesting. That program of thought as to why we survive. Like, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have that sort of cutthroat attitude that we have, that competitive attitude is our survival program. But I feel like until we cleanse that pain and actually free ourselves, then of course we're just going to keep, creating new problems as we try and fix everything that comes along, maybe even solving and creating a whole world of veganism. We don't know, right? If we're in the wrong mindset, it might just create other things that we can't even see coming, that might even be more difficult to deal with. So me personally, I feel like we really need to, I think we're at a point where we need to pull back and have a good, long, hard look at everything and recognize the fact that if we could psychologically free ourselves, I think as a species, we could function consciously. And to function consciously means we don't actually need a program guiding us anymore. Because I think the program's what's causing all the trouble. I think the human program was kind of a default mode that we needed until we could get to this point in time where we're having conversations like this, where we could possibly recognize that it's time for a real change. And I think that real change is that we can function as conscious beings, which don't need a program to tell us what right and wrong is, or whether, a good feeling or a bad feeling is, we don't need a program to say that animal cruelty is wrong, for example, in our mind, just because a horrible feeling emerges in my head. I think we should be in a conscious state and, of course, just know that is inappropriate. We don't have to suffer to know. Whereas at the moment, all of our learning tends to come from suffering. And that is it's a primitive, antiquated way of learning, but it works to a degree, but it's not working anymore. And unfortunately, we're using that same energy that perhaps vegans are fighting against animal cruelty. It's the same energy, though, that's doing everything else on the planet. It's the same one that feeds, because everyone thinks they're right. The people that are fighting against veganism, they think vegans are crazy and that they're right and that it's our right as a species to do what we like. So for me, I think this is becoming an interesting challenge. And I think we're at that point where I think veganism has at least pushed hard enough into the world. And you can see now, obviously, it's a lot more prevalent in terms of people's awareness of it, that we now need to go to that next level. And I think that next level is not to discount veganism, but we need to step back and look at that bigger picture that you and I are talking about today, where we truly recognize that if we don't work out how to function, in a conscious way rather than in it, because right now pain is our guide, right? So when we don't feel pain, we think something's okay. And when we do feel pain, something is wrong. But the problem with that is, if, as you said, if the programming can mislead us. It can mislead us to think that cruelty is okay because it doesn't create a bad feeling. So it's all over the place at the moment, which is why I think we need to remove ourselves from pain completely. Which I'm not saying this is easy to do, obviously. To globally create this shift, I'm not exactly sure what that's going to take, but it would take some kind of collective agreement that this is what we need to do. Because you talk about spirituality and finding that conscious space, is that on the same, are you talking in your own language as to where I'm thinking about us as a species and what we need to do in terms of how we're going to remove ourselves from this pain-driven reality that we're currently in?
I think so. I think it's similar to what you're saying. I probably have a few differences on some things, but I think essentially, um, I absolutely agree that the program is the problem. The conditioning, we've had a program injected into us without our permission, and it's a lot of it is about, it's based on the attitudes of animal agriculture, on disconnectedness, on reductionism, reducing beings to things, on separation, on domination of the feminine. Might makes right, and that we're fundamentally, materialism is a big part of it. Materialism, which is that the fundamental nature of reality is matter. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. That's the polar opposite of spirituality, which says what we are is essentially eternal consciousness, and what animals are is expression of consciousness. So we're interconnected with all life. So animal agriculture is a program that is directly erodes and attacks spirituality. And spirituality, to me, is a way of awakening to the truth that we are, and it means questioning the program. That's the key of spirituality is questioning the program, and it means living with no program. In a sense, it means trusting our intuition, trusting our inner wisdom. Each person trusting their inner wisdom to live their life. Each one of us has sovereignty. Each one of us is free. Each one of us can relate and communicate with each other. This only works when our intuition is operating, when we're not just operating out of a program. But since we've all been taught from the time we're little kids to abandon our intuition, since we've been wounded horribly, this is the way we do birth. We do birth to humans the way we do birth to cows and pigs, right? This is not your baby. This is my baby. I'm going to mandatorily vaccinate. I'm going to whack and smack and, the poor little kid. We get so abused early on, horribly abused early on. It just shuts down our intuition, shuts down our natural sense of self-confidence, shuts down our natural celebratory sense of being part of a benevolent, beautiful earth. And we really get so wounded right off the bat. And then we're put into a very competitive environment at school. And it just goes on from there. So we are really wounded as human beings. You have to understand that there's an extremely toxic program that we are thrown into from infancy. And it's administered by people we trust completely, who are well-meaning. Our own parents and teachers, they were abused the same way, and so they do the same thing. This goes through, and I think it's really important to question the history. We have this idea that we needed this kind of something to get to where we are. I think. I used to teach world mythology, and it's to me, it's very interesting to see that, 10,000 years ago, roughly, we started herding animals. And this was sort of, to me, this is when we left the garden. And this is when we started to create a wealthy elite class. Women began to be seen as objects. We started war for the first time, slavery for the first time. All these things came out of animal agriculture. So animal agriculture was such a massive revolution. It took a long time. It was very slow. But it completely changed human society. If we can go back before that, it's hard to know what happened. But in world mythology, there's basically a monomyth, a story of a time that was a golden age, or a time when we were in the garden, or a time when we were relaxed and peaceful and happy, and there was plenty, and a time when there was another where it was different. And I don't really trust anthropologists and archaeologists that much with what they say. I think a lot, I got a PhD at Berkeley, and I understand that if you're going to get a PhD, you have to be willing to take on the cultural program, because if they're not going to give you a PhD typically unless you're one of them. I had to fight like heck to not be terribly wounded in getting a PhD. So most of the so-called educated people that we respect, because they're very high up in education, they're very wounded by that system too. So I don't believe science very often, or whatever research says. I think that's why I think intuition is so important, and reconnecting with our inner wisdom. And I think the most immediate doorway really is veganism, because it's practical and it's straightforward. It's like, just move away from eating animal foods, and it's something we can practically do.
Yes.
But then we can't stop there. We have to realize that is ahimsa, nonviolence. So to really bring our relationships with other human beings the same way with animals, right? To treat every
Yes.
human with respect and kindness and patience and love, even people we don't like. So I see it ourselves, personally, me as a vegan, I see myself not as fighting against an obsolete, terrible system of animal agriculture. Because I think if I'm fighting something that's violent and brutal, pretty soon I become violent and brutal myself.
That's right.
Because they're more violent and brutal than I can ever be. And if I'm going to fight them, it just brings out the worst in me. So to me, it's all about being creative. And just going and just creating a different thing. And let's creatively transform ourselves and create systems where we're growing our own food veganically, where we're communicating, where we're cooperating on every level, if we can, as much as possible, reconnect with the earth, with our food, with each other, with energy, not be dependent on the military industrial energy grid. I think it's happening. I think people are beginning to grow their own food more and create these webs, these networks. It's kind of an invisible movement, but I think anything we can do to contribute to that, so on the outer world, and to build a positive alternative, because I think this big thing that's built on violence and abuse is going to collapse somehow. It's really built on such rotten, toxic lies for the most part, and it's so harmful and devastating to ecosystems and to people and everything. We should be withdrawing our energy from that and putting our energy into conversations where we're supporting our intuition. Each one of us has something to contribute. We're not trying to market something. We're trying to live a life of harmony and peace for the few decades we have here. We're just here for a few decades. Each one of us can just plant a few seeds and then we go, right? That's what we can do. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. I really don't know.
So that's why, look, it's an interesting phase, because we're asking people to face stuff that they can barely, because, from my investigation, if I grab, say, most vegans that say they're horrified by animal cruelty, and there's a lot that are genuinely horrified to the point where they find it consumes their life and they find it hard to get on with things. But from my work, I found if I was to really, and this is an honest truth that's probably hard for people to face, they're more concerned about whether they like their face or whether they're good looking, or their insecurities about themselves ultimately are their dominant force in the way, because pain always ends up there. And that's part of the human program once again. And I think that's why we're not transitioning and growing. And it might sound like a simplistic answer, but I'm finding more and more, if we keep looking at the bigger issues, we're kind of avoiding what's really going where pain is hiding in our system. And pain keeps the program active, because as long as there's pain, then the brain by default will say, I have to be here in a survival mode.
Right.
It's true. And it just goes on and on. But what we're not addressing is our obsession with our self. And we can see it's growing. We've got young girls today that dress like older women with makeup and clothes and whatever. So the obsession is starting younger and younger. Men are getting more obsessed about their bodies and plastic surgery and silicone shoulders and you name it. So there's a million examples we can give as to prove that we are self-obsessed. But I find that human insecurities, individual insecurities about whether it be our self-worth or how we look, is stopping us from moving forward. Because ultimately that is so draining on a day-to-day basis, then asking that person that can barely even come to terms with something like, do you like yourself, to ask them to care about the whole world or animals, for example, is very hard. And some people are caring enough that even though they're carrying those insecurities, they can make that leap to care about the animals, but then they take all those insecurities into the vegan movement. And this is where I sort of feel like we've really got to, let's say we look at history, we can look at where we're at today, we can look at everything going on. We almost need to lay it all out in front of us and then just extract the program and see that that's the program's created throughout history. It's been the program leading us in many ways. And I think what we're seeing in the world today is a more honest, true reflection of the human program. So if we've ever had a reason to step away from it, here it is, because it's exposed in all of its glory. So for me, I don't know how much you would have come across that in your work, but do you find that you would find some agreements in that our individual insecurities ultimately are going to trip us up if we can't learn to feel more solid within ourselves as an individual? Then obviously moving forward is always going to be tainted because if I'm feeling insecure, I know like if I have a bad day and I'm feeling worse, there's a filter I look through, and it's not David. I'm not clear. I'm not cleansed, and therefore there's less honesty in what I say. I will edit the information coming back at me, and then we're just in this world now where we're just editing everything to suit our own purpose.
Right.
And we literally need to create an unedited world, but we've got to live in an unedited world internally. So if this is healthy in here, then we're going to create a healthy world out there. And I know this is an obvious statement, but we have to get real about where this is all coming from and where it's sitting, because I don't see anything as wrong as such the way the world is today. And I agree with you. There's nothing to fight against. I think what we're seeing is just the unfolding of a survival mechanism that the whole planet, every animal functions in that mode. And I think we as humans are coming out the other side. And maybe this is the beginning of the first species to be able to function outside of a survival mode as such. But we've got to be honest about what that mode is. And part of that mode is to be insecure. Because I think being insecure keeps us alert. So I think it's just part of what we're meant to be to get to this point. But those insecurities are going to destroy our future in so many ways. And all the leaders of the planet today, they seem to be getting weaker and stranger. And I see more insecurities in them and more lies. And I just feel like this is all building and growing. How do you feel about the growth of that from a psychological point of view, from what you come across?
Well, I think that you're really saying something important for us as individuals and for us as a society, because if we want to in any way be happy ourselves or to be part of a solution to make a more harmonious world, we have to live this. We have to discover security within ourselves. It's not based on what other people do or say or think about us. And we're trained from infancy not to do that. We're trained from infancy to be dependent on what other people say, because if they like us, we are accepted, we make more money,
right.
All these things. If they don't, then, we're out of the tribe, it's terrible, And so that leads very often to relationship issues. Like if I'm working on a book or a big project, but if I can't get along with my partner very well, and we're quarreling about something, forget it. It's like terrible. I mean, nothing really gets done positively. It's just these things really sap our energy and warp us away from being effective. And if we have movements that are based on unhealthy relationships in general, and we see quite a bit of this even in the vegan movement, which as well as, of course, in the environmental movement, all the movements, there's justice movements and whatever. But I think that's why I think it's important to come back to meditation. Meditation to me is not a particular formula. It's just simply realizing that it's almost like there's two modes of the mind, right? The mode of the mind where I'm thinking and doing and acting and all that. And that's pretty much what most people live with. What I would have, if I hadn't discovered, and I was a Zen monk in Korea, so I practiced cultivating this other aspect, which is to just be in silence and just listen. And what I've discovered, and it's no big deal, but it's just simply that if I do that every single day for a significant enough amount of time, at least an hour, a couple hours, then it creates sort of a foundation where the security comes from a sense of space, that I'm not just this object that was born and will die, and I have to get what I want, keep away what I don't want, and be functioning in kind of an adversarial way with other people that are doing the same thing. And then I'm just my thoughts and actions and my body and these things. That I realize that what I am is eternal consciousness that was never born and will never die. That's the ultimate. That's. I think everyone knows that. We all know that there's someone in here. There's some kind of awareness.
Yes.
And yet we're raised in a society where we're taught to deny that and to see ourselves as just a body with a history, and we're in this competitive, and so it's this massive insecurity. I mean, there's no security there because we're going to die, and we're never going to get what we really want, and it's a hopeless, hellish struggle on that from that foundation. And even if we're working for something good like veganism, we're still looking over our shoulder and see if people like us, see if we're making enough money, see if all this. We're still kind of stuck in this misery. So it's very important, I think, to just clearly see these two things: that animal agriculture is not our friend, and this fundamental sense of a separate self is also not our friend. That we are far greater if we can quiet our mind, take time every day, just practice. It's like I can sit at the piano now and I can really play. I can play pieces and all this stuff. It's only because I did it every day for 40 years, and so I developed a little bit of ability. It's the same thing with just sitting with ourselves and being quiet. In the beginning, it's like terrible. It's like, oh, my mind is crazy and I can't stand it. But if we just keep doing it, eventually we can get in touch with a current of awareness that is, in a sense, it transcends all of this. It's kind of like witnessing everything. It's like watching it and aware of it. And so when people say things that would make me feel terrible, it doesn't grab me the same way. It's like, oh, well, they must be having a bad day, all right. And I think we can't fake that. I mean, that's something that we just, when we get unjustly accused or something, most people just feel, I've got to defend myself. But if we can actually realize that I can't change other people, I can only change my reaction to things, and that I'm not just this object that was born and will die in the mind that's sort of stuck in that, then we have a connection with our intuition. We have a connection, I think, maybe with a foundation where a security. I mean, I like what you say. Insecurity is good because it kind of keeps us aware, on our toes. So I think there's another kind of security, though, another kind of insecurity, maybe. Alan Watts wrote a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity. He was saying, sort of from the higher point of view, we can see that it's fine to be insecure. I don't want the government trying to make everything secure. I don't want them taking away my freedoms, so I'm secure. This mania for being secure, that comes from insecurity. We're going to be, perfect security is throw everybody in a jail, and behind bars, and then you're secure. But that's not a life. That's misery. That's slavery. So the whole idea is, we are insecure. We never know. We could die any second. Anything can happen. So just be fine with that, and be connected to the deeper reality. And that's something that I think each one of us has to make an effort to contact that dimension of consciousness that transcends the personal, the personality. Person means mask, the mask that we put on. Yes. It transcends that mask. And I think that's what we have to do.
Well, because ultimately that's our conception. The self that we run around in is not us. It's a version of us. And that's the survival program. And it's just an idea. So we're trying to make an idea real, and an idea will never be anything but an idea. And I think it's an odd thing for people to accept that their whole life is just an idea, rather than, because the good news is that there is a real person inside everyone. I've worked with people where they could have been through the worst abuse you could come up with, whether it be raped as a child repeatedly by many family members and et cetera, et cetera. And then they turn up to me, maybe say, I had one person come to me around 40 years of age, absolutely devastated, tried every attempt of psychology and psychiatry to try and find an answer and an out and specialists and everything just made her feel worse because it drew attention to what had happened to her. So what I did was the opposite. I just took her on a journey into feeling her own existence, obviously beyond everything that had happened to her. And then she had a moment where she felt like she was floating off her chair, and she started grabbing her chair, thinking she was elevating. And all she was feeling was her life for the first time without that burden, that psychological idea that she is no good because of what happened to her. But the point I'm getting to is that we're undamaged by life, that the us part. So that's the beauty of this. This is why I have so much hope and faith for what can happen, because we're not destroyed, we're not damaged. It feels like we're damaged because the idea of us is damaged. But once we stop identifying with our our experiences of life and start tuning into us, then I don't think there's any need. I think one day there won't be need for insecurity, because then we won't need implementations of controls like you say, because you're right, because otherwise we should all lock ourselves up behind bars so we know we can't hurt each other or ourselves. But obviously that's not the answer, but that's where we're heading. I agree. We're just more every day. There's more laws, more controls, more everything. And all that does is make us feel more insecure ultimately. And then we behave worse, and then we get more laws to control that bad behavior, and on we go. But the fact that we're untainted by this world, like even physically, I've worked with people that have, had massive brain tumors where their brains aren't even functioning anymore and they could barely talk to anyone. But with enough on my part to dive in, the real them was still there, undamaged. Even though their brain is damaged, they're pure in the essence of them. So whether it be from experiences or physical damage, there is a purity in us that I feel is just waiting to be awoken. And that purity, I feel, is the consciousness that we're talking about. That could be our guide. Then we are the guide, effectively, rather than needing information to guide us. I don't think, in a pure conscious state, without fear, I don't think there's any human being that's going to look at cruelty and have a debate about whether that's right or wrong.
Right.
And that's why I won't debate personally, because I think there's no debate to be had. And there's a lot of what I've heard you say today that I feel very strongly, flowing with, because I feel like it's not about fighting against the world. It's about bringing something new into this world, because it's almost like we just need to, I think given the opportunity to flow out of what was, we'll take it. That real us that's sitting in there is not going to say no to a beautiful life if it's real, right? But if we keep saying how terrible things are and smacking everyone in the face, we're feeding the energy that created, the problem in the first place. So the human brain in itself is not the problem. It's only when it's functioning through fear that the human brain becomes very weird. And even like, with meditation, I think meditation is a way of calming us down. And then ultimately, I think our neural pathways will fire up, but not in a survival way. I think our brains will be fully active, but peacefully active. And maybe the day will come where we'll just exist, where we won't even have to think about these things. I think we'll just be alive and communicating and sharing and feeling, and because and everyone else I work with in my life too, the amount of emotional repression is enormous, because of this very cruel system you're talking about. And I felt everything you said earlier, like when I was a kid, I felt like I was being abused. I felt my mum and dad were sending me off to this abusive place, where I was never treated like an individual. I was never recognized as being a caring kid. At home, I was always like saving insects and helping animals, and yet you go to school and all they tell you is no, you've got to be this, you've got to be that, and you've got to plan, and you've got to be successful, and then if you don't fit in, then you're no good. And before you know it, yes, we've set our children up for disaster, right from the beginning. So I think there's so much we can do. Like, a lot of people feel like it's hopeless because they just look at the bleakness of what we see. But if you look beyond the bleakness of what is today, there's just a richness of what we are inside that's just waiting to come out. So I guess the challenge is, how do you feel? What would be the next steps in your mind what could we do to bring that out, to create a more collective awareness that we need to re-educate ourselves to free ourselves effectively? Do you have any ideas as to what we could do to create that, other than, of course, having these conversations and things like that?
Yeah, I think as far as what we do, again, I think it comes back essentially to making an effort to question the official narrative in our society it's in our culture, but it's also inside us, that has been sort of implanted into us. And I really like what you're saying about the essential unharmed essence that we are. It's almost like who we are exists on a completely different dimension than this physical world, actually. It's like the sky. I felt this so much when I was in Korea, meditating 12 hours a day. And at a certain point, I got a glimpse that what I am is the entire sky, the infinite sky, and the clouds roll in and they completely cover the sky. You can't even see the sky anymore. But the clouds cannot touch the sky. The clouds can never harm the sky. The sky exists completely beyond the cloud's capacity to harm the sky.
Yes.
And so I realized that all of the things that had hurt me, the wounds, the fears, the pains, all those are clouds. And if I keep looking at them, they sure seem real. That's all there is. There isn't any sky. There's just the clouds. That's all there is. And I think in our culture, since our media and our programming and everything, the sky doesn't exist in our conversation. All we talk about is the sky, if it's black or gray or white. But it's only the clouds. The clouds of essentially of illusion that keep us in, like you say, in fear and insecurity, in competition, in a sense of being separate from each other. Manipulating situations to get what we want and keep away what we don't want, and all of that, and to actually recognize that these clouds are ultimately the wind's going to blow them all away, and that we're here. The more I think that each one of us can manifest the sky-like nature of our true nature in our life, and I think that will be expressed as respect and kindness for others. And there's something I've been thinking about I wanted to mention related to this, which is, I've coined a new term. The term is the enlightenment fallacy. And what I mean by the enlightenment fallacy is this. People think, I see this a lot, people think that as they become more enlightened, then they can kind of more and more do whatever they want. I'm enlightened. I can eat some meat, I can eat some dairy, I can make my own rules because I'm enlightened. I'm very spiritually involved. I'm more spiritually involved than the average person. So I did a lot of all this. So, and there's an old saying in the Buddhist tradition somewhere. I think it was Padmasambhava said, "Your view should be as vast as the sky, and your mindfulness of your behavior should be as fine as barley flour." And I think people think that there's a conflict there, that, if my view is as vast as the sky, then I can do whatever I want. I don't have to worry, And I really feel more and more that, no. We are, as our view becomes more liberated, our joy becomes more unbounded, and we realize the gratitude that we have for another day on this beautiful planet, then we become very conscious of not criticizing, blaming, and complaining and doing things that harm other people. I think that's a natural part of an authentic spiritual path, is to become very conscious of our abuse of animals or other animals, human animals, and that we are very aware of that. And I think this is a critical point today, because there's this huge explosion of yoga and spirituality, and people think that don't talk to me about all this stuff. I'm free. I can make up my own mind. I can do what I want. But the thing is, if people are eating animal foods and engaging in these behaviors, that's part of the program, and it's much easier not to question it than it is to question it. So I think it's important to see that the sky and the barley flour go together, and it's a beautiful thing. Being like, people look at my life very often, they say, "Gosh, I would hate to be so limited as you. You're so disciplined. You get up early in the morning and you only eat this, and you won't buy that, and you won't do this, and you won't go there, and you won't do that." And it's like no to all these things. But to me, it's like I'm saying yes. They're taking time to meditate and all the things I love to do. It's like it just opens up so many doorways. And if I say yes to drinking alcohol and yes to all these other things, I mean, to me that's actually much worse. So to me, discipline and saying no to the things that most people think bring pleasure opens up a much huger pleasure. I mean, such a bigger pleasure. I mean, it's so far beyond the pleasures that people are trying to get that really just lead to misery, actually.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I agree with you 100%, and I love, the analogy of the sky, because ultimately, yes, we're at the moment we're focusing on the clouds too much, and then there's this massive, because I think if we could step back and do what you're saying, you can be specific, you can look at the finer points of life, but if you look at them in the whole bigger picture of life, then of course you see it without getting trapped inside the thing you're looking at. Whereas if I just focus on animal cruelty and think of nothing else, then of course my mind's inside all that pain and suffering, and then my whole existence now is in there. Then I'm going to be also a representation of pain and suffering, and now my concern for the animals, I'm probably suffering, as much unnecessarily. Whereas I find myself, the key for me is to do the same thing, is to stay in that free, bigger space. And then that opens doors everywhere, just like you're saying. And because ultimately all everyone's doing is chasing a feeling. I think we over-identify with feelings, but obviously emotions are the energy. I look at emotions as like life. When I think of an emotion, even a good or bad one, I look at it like as a beautiful dove, a white dove, if to represent peace. Set it free, right? And they're beautiful emotions, because if you're kind to them, they let you ride with them. They're like a fuel that will take you into the outer reaches of your existence. But if you try and attach a meaning to them, it's like putting life in jail, and that's where we're a bit obsessed at the moment. We're trying to find meaning in our existence, who I am, what I am, my purpose, what the world is. And I think if we could just learn to find this freedom you're talking about, and part of that, I think, is to learn how to set our emotions free and stop, because emotions aren't us. You're not your emotions, and I'm not my emotions, but they are beautiful, beautiful things, for want of a better term. They're a beautiful expression of life, but only when set free. And they gift us with wisdom, but the wisdom doesn't come in the midst of that heavy emotion. The wisdom comes once we land, once the emotion sets us back down on the ground. Then I find there's all this wisdom innately there. I didn't have to look for it. I don't have to think about it. I can think while I'm on that emotional ride, but I'm not looking for meaning. I'm not trying to say, right, I'm feeling this, therefore that means that. And I think we're jumping too quickly at the moment. We're very lunging for answers. Whereas I think if we just stopped looking at all the clouds, as you say, as problems that need fixing, and realize that, once we see past the clouds and see the whole sky, I think the inspiration of what is awaiting us is enormous. And I think we're going to be fine. I really do. I think it's still got to happen. Like if people like you and I sat there and did nothing, then of course maybe the awakening wouldn't happen. We need lots of people bringing this to life, because not everyone's going to naturally find that space because they're caught in the system too much. But I think once we can get people's attention off the problems, right, the perceived problems, and start not to ignore the problem. The problems are just to draw attention that we're trapped inside a certain psychological framework. But then I think it's to do more what you talk about, and that's to take us to that bigger picture of life itself. And I think within that is where the healing happens. It's where the clarity happens. And as you say, like the doors open, and if people want to feel stuff, there are the feelings waiting for you. There are emotions everywhere. And I feel so rich in myself. A day feels like, a year every day. Like every day is just rich with emotion of some kind. And as long as I ride them and don't attach meaning to them, then I feel I've grown every day, and I wake up a new man, and then there's a new life. But there's always this core awareness of me within that. So I always know where I'm at, why I'm there, and what I'm doing, rather than trying to work out where I'm at and where I'm going next, and what should happen here, and what would happen if this happened over there. And, then before you know it, we're so scrambly in our minds, and there's a limit to how much you can think that way. Right. And then there's that delusion of how much can one individual control anyway. So if we can just drop the controls and the need to control in the first instance, but then I think without this clear pathway to take them to the place you're talking to, then they wouldn't know where to go. Like trying to convince people to drop their attention on individual things would seem ludicrous. Even to ask people to say just temporarily to stop looking at animal cruelty just for a moment, because I think we need to feel ourselves beyond even being a human being. I think we need to take a moment to forget that we're even on this planet. That there is cruelty, that we are psychologically falling down. And I think if we could just find that peaceful moment, just for a moment, collectively, like imagine if there was just one day where the whole planet took a break. I reckon we'd come out the other side, like all going like, whoa, where have we been? and I think there'll be fresh space in front of us, and I think then the light is not an objective, because I think there's two ways of doing it. You can have objectives, which is a narrow, feels like light in the beginning, but it ends up being a dark, narrow tunnel and you're stuck in it. Or you can shine beautiful visions out into the world, and those visions become the light, but they're not, it doesn't mean we have to tie ourselves to that vision. The vision is more just the light of shining the possibilities of what lays ahead of us. So somehow we need to sort of unravel the mess without making it a problem, if you know what I mean. Because I think that's where we've gone off track. We're just getting too heavy and trying to make everything, we got to solve this and fix this. Whereas I don't think we need fixing. I don't think we're broken as a species. I think that the innate us, as you've discovered, is beautiful and rich and full, which is why somehow we need to release that.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think the thing that will really help us the most is our positive images, and the negative. I think it's important to take in. At least it's been for me important to take in the negative images of what cows and pigs and chickens and fishes endure in animal agriculture, and sort of really let that in and be aware of it. But if I just stop with that and don't go farther, it's devastating, because it's so much misery and suffering, and it pervades everything. And
yes.
I think images, like you've been just saying, of how we're not just this collection of thoughts and emotions. We can ride them, but they're not us. But having images of a positive future, for example, images, and this is happening. I mean, images of delicious plant-based meals, images of people growing their own food, gardens, images of harmony with nature. I think we're deluged with so much negative imagery, and I remember learning a few years ago that marketing analysts discovered that if you bombard people with negative images, they will buy more products, they'll consume more things. So there's this whole emphasis on us just being bombarded with negative images. So I think a lot of our job is to create within ourselves the positivity that helps us to live our lives, to cultivate a sense of gratitude for the beauty in our lives. That yes, there are animals who are imprisoned, but look at this: there's birds flying around, and there's butterflies, and there's lots of animals celebrating their lives. There's a lot of beauty on this planet, and to build and cultivate the beauty, and to emphasize that, to just encourage the beauty. And I think as we do that more and more, we're building a pathway through a doorway that's beckoning to us. And I think, kind of like you said, you implied, I think, that we don't have to do this. I think there's, this idea of critical mass is part of it. It's like as more and more individuals wake up and light their own inner candle, then it's easier for other people to also wake up and light their candle, and at a certain point, something's taking over. Some larger awakening is happening, and we can each contribute to it. But the only way we can really contribute to it authentically, I think, is by doing the inner work, to question the official narratives, all that live inside me, and take time to connect with our intuition, this inner wisdom that goes beyond the program.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we adults need to stop abusing, as you said, stop abusing children just because we were abused. Basically, is what it gets down to.
That's a huge thing. That's so huge.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Because we can't justify it. Just it's like I can see how some adults, because of the way the brain works and fear works, and the more something's repeated, the more trapped we become in that mode of thought. And we can all feel that. I can feel that in my head. For me to shake off my learning, there's so much repetitive negative thinking that was accumulated over the years of being at school or whatever, that I can feel the remnants of that, and I'm aware of that. So I know how tough that is, but I know that focusing on that is not the answer. It really is. It is shining that light, and it's almost got to the point where I don't even know if I need to see it as positive anymore, because it just is. You know what I mean? Like, right. It's just a beautiful light. And that's what I like about it. I think there is a natural light, and I don't think we have to, because in some ways, I guess, if someone, the only risk of saying, like, if I say that my way is a positive way, then someone's going to argue in their conceptual world that
Right.
no, but it's negative for these reasons. So I almost just feel like just to continually just keep putting that light out there, keep shining it, and I think it will do the job. And I think the more strong, that you, me, and a whole bunch of other people are putting that light out into the world, then eventually the world is illuminated. We're not in the dark anymore. And we're only in the dark because we're all trapped in that tight little world I'm talking about, that world of fear, that world of insecurity. And it doesn't allow us to see a whole bunch. But I think once we remove those filters and we allow ourselves to feel and see the world for what it really is and what's really waiting us, I don't even think we need to know where we're going to be. I just think I can feel, you can feel it in yourself, what we're capable of and what we could be and how societies could look. Whether we'd even have a word like society, I don't even know. Like, to be honest, like if we could grab what you and I are talking about and somehow inject that into humanity today, so everyone was awoken like that, in 1,000 years from now, it's probably beyond my imagination as to what societies or life or whatever would look like on this planet. But it would be very, very different to what we see today. That's for sure. And I think this is the end of the era. I think, I like where you're coming from a lot, actually. I wish I could hear more of this, but I think this in essence is what needs to be injected into the world. And I think it's just a matter of standing up and realizing that this is what we need to do and that there is no fight, there is no battle, there's nothing wrong as such. The life is unfolding as it was meant to. And I think it's the end of an old way. And I think for whatever reason, planet Earth has afforded us with this possibility of a new way of being.
Right. Yeah, it's a birthing process, and we really don't know exactly what we're birthing, but it's and it's a beautiful thing to be part of. I think it's great to be on the planet right now, like you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it is. That's right. So rather than seeing it as the worst time, I say that to a lot of people. It's an exciting time if you really open yourself to it and you stop focusing on the problems and actually start giving to the bigger picture of life. Then what a time, You and I are living in maybe the first beginning of the true transition of our species.
Right.
What could be more exciting than that? I hope I live long enough to see the end of this era. Right. I would love to even just taste the beginning of the new era, which I think we're tasting it now, but I mean in a way where, there is literally no more animal cruelty and no more abuse and no more human suffering, because human suffering is what creates the justifications ultimately.
Right.
Because if we weren't suffering, why would we justify the suffering of others?
Yeah, right.
We wouldn't do it.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Will, would you happy with that, or would you like to add a little bit more? Or are you happy to wrap it up, and then maybe we can check in at another time down the track and see where things are at?
Thanks, David. Yeah, no, I think this is great. And all we can do, I think, essentially is plant seeds that come from our own experience in our hearts. And then let go. You plant the seed, then keep digging up. Just let it go, and it'll sprout however it does.
Yes.
And I think just each one of us to do the best we can to plant seeds of awareness is the key.
Look, I think I just want to really emphasize that point you just made, because I think it's perfect. If people could learn to do what you just said, put it out there, but let go. Don't get obsessive about whether someone's going to agree with you, or because I look at my life. If the older I get, the more peaceful I become, because I'm not trying. There's no me deciding who I should be helping. I'm just doing it because I can see it's there to be done. Rather than me having an objective where I say, right, my life is about joining in on saving the world, or doing this or doing that, or making humans think better. And then it gets too specific. Or if I come across an individual, I may share who I am, but who I help is not my decision to make.
Right.
And I think if we could all think like that, then we'd all just be giving. And then some people's giving helps different types of people, and my giving might help a certain type of people. And as long as we're all giving and stop worrying about whether they're listening or not, then I think, that whole idea of giving and then letting go is perfect, and a lovely note to finishing on. So I just wanted to really, agree with you very strongly on that, because I think that is one of the keys to this whole thing, and that's like setting life free once again, which is everything you talk about is about, it's got a lovely freedom feeling about it. Look, lovely to talk to you, Will. Absolutely delighted, actually. You've wherever you're coming from, I think it is the essence of the truth of what is going to to create that freedom we're talking about. So
Great.
I think as long as we just do what you say, keep giving and let go, I think we'll get there. I really do. I feel strongly about that.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Thanks everyone, whoever you are, who are watching and listening, and we're with you in spirit.
Lovely, beautiful. All right, well, thank you for that, and I look forward to hopefully catching up down the track, and we'll see how the progression of our species go.
Great. Thanks.
All right.